Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It is your favorite warlock here, practicing necromancer. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about Kakashi. As you know, I have been studying and practicing necromancy for about 6 years now, about 4 years on a dedicated professional path working. So I've been studying everything from the deities to the pagan practices. And I've been following a lot of the mythos and the folkloric traditions between the deities and these, well, let's just call them the way they are, It's, if you want to, the higher gods versus the lower gods, the demigods, if you will, versus the gods, down to the actual practitioners in that formality. So you have the gods, the demigods, and then the practitioners. And then you have the commoners underneath that. So, um, where to begin? AT 302 to AT 313, for an example. Kakashi was said to be an immortal. He became the deathless one because of the fact that he was unkillable. Hey, where have we heard that story before, right? Romanian Prince Vlad Tempest, you know, the immortal, the vampiric lord or overlord, Dracula, as they like to call him today in Hollywood, franchises. But if you look at it, the stories are literally the same in some ways, in different in other ways. Kind of like going between the Sith of Celtic and the Sidi of Swedish, you know, or Norwegian. Very interesting similarities and differences between these deities and these pagan gods, if you will. So I want you to picture an invading army of JCI, Christianity, Catholicdom, the Roman Catholic Church, who were going through the world conquering, burning, raping, and basically eliminating all opposition. Okay, we saw this in the ancient Gaelic regions of the world. How they wiped out the Druids, fought a 100-year war. With the Gaelic people, and eventually pulled out of Europe altogether and went home. Ironic how that always happens. But we also see the same thing, but more of a psychological perspective within the Slavic and Russian folkloric traditions. And this was completely flat out different from how the church handled the 100-year war with the Gaelics. Okay, hey, they could raise an army and go to war against the Romans in the church every day, if they wanted to. But it wasn't until they went out, was fighting the people, and sent a garrison secretly off to kill the Druids, that they humbled those people and brought them to their knees. But they flipped that, and instead of going after the bodies, they went after the mind and the soul of the people. When it came to Russian and Slavic, Scandinavian, and Hungarian, and even Turkish, perspectives, because of the fact that these deities are all through this region. It doesn't matter if you're following Chernobog, Belobog, Baba Yaga, or even, say, for an example, Kakashi the Deathless, the Immortal. You know, and as a necromancer, one of the things that you study is death. So you're going through anthropology. You're going through medical stuff. You're going through historical, archaeological. You're going through folklore, traditions, and everything worldwide to find these elixirs and these practices. Doesn't matter if it's a Shem priesthood out of Egypt, the Shem, the Hashishin out of Pakistan. These cults and these practitioners are all over the freaking world. So when we get to Slavic traditions, there's really no surprise that you see a whole nother standard taking place. On one hand, you got people turning Catholic and Christian while coexisting for hundreds of years with pagans. So you can't tell me that balance and that harmony can't be achieved. Russia today is a prime example of this. Okay? Now, I'm not excusing the war in Ukraine or anything. I'm just saying when it comes to religious perspectives, you can't find another region where religions coexist in that manner. So when I first started studying necromancy, I used to trace these beings worldwide. And it was interesting because I was always a fan of Baba Yaga as a practicing warlock, a satanic warlock. It was something that I was fascinated with. I always loved the term warlock, especially ever since I saw the movie when I was a kid that Julian Sands starred in called The Warlock. The three Warlock series there. It was The Warlock Armageddon, and the third one there. I can't think of the third one's name, but Julian Sands was one of those old school practitioners, and you got to give him the horns. You know what I'm saying? Give him the horns up on that one in remembrance of him. He was an old school poet. His words were old school. That's all I got to say. That nobody spoke like him. Nobody could keep up with his words, his knowledge, the practices that he did in those films, and how he represented a practitioner, especially a dark sorcerer, in that very well mannered fashion. So when we get to the mythology of Kakashi, some of the texts we see where he was a prisoner in a tower, and he had been a prisoner for numerous years. He withered into a crippled old man, gray hair, beard, the whole king caboodle, and he was literally skin and bone. So by the time the daughter got married and took over the kingdom, and the husband discovered him in this fashion, made the mistake of giving him water that rejuvenated him. And this goes along with the Greek and Roman necromantic practices in the form of rejuvenation or conjuration practices. Okay. So it was kind of cool to see that. I mean, even if you're working with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's said that these rites could reanimate the dead in Egyptian necromancy and also send them on their way. Now, the Shem priesthood had the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and it was interesting because even during the mummification, the cleansing processes, they also removed 4 major organs that they believed that the individual would need if they ever came back to the land of the living. Okay, so to see this, it was kind of like, wow. So when we look at it in this form, rejuvenation is one of the most popular practices out there. The reversal of decay, the reversal of the corrupted bodily materials. In today's world, we got what? Diseases. We've got cancers that eat at the bones, and the blood cancers, and organ dysfunctions such as kidney paralysis, and teeth going bad, and they have to drill and do root canals and put this fake shit in. breast cancer, that where they have to cut off the breast, part of the breast, and put in silicone, or just leave it the way it is. There's a lot of different things that take place. And one of the things I talked about in my last video was the necronic surgery, where they would remove a portion of, say, bone, for an example, and put a metal rod in, and then seal up that leg. And what would happen over the next year or two would be, which from what I understand is very painful, the bone would grow along that metal rod and infuse when it connects in the center. So reanimation is something that is realistic in the world, in worldly applications. Okay. It's realistic, hands down. Everybody has it, from religions to medical professionals. Okay. So to have water given to Kakashi by this young king that rejuvenates him, the guy breaks free, kidnaps the daughter, the princess, the queen, and takes her back to his kingdom that is supposedly filled with ice and death, and nothing really exists within there. And he has the fastest horse known to mankind at this time. So after two failed attempts, he finally goes to the witch known as Baba Yaga. Okay, in this particular or this particular tale, which is known as, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, so I do apologize. It's Tsarevich, Petr, Petr, and the Wizard. Okay, so you see where you're bringing in another being, a practitioner of witchcraft. And Baba Yaga is known as the witch of the 12th dimension, especially in Warcraft and a few other video games. But in Slavic, with sorcery, in folklore mythology, Baba Yaga is known as the old hag who went after children. You know, so almost like today's pedophiles, if you will, went after children. But it was interesting to see how she was supposedly the maiden, the mother figure, like the mother, maiden, and crone, all rolled into one, with such overwhelming power that she could change her appearance at will, on a whim. Very, very interesting. And it was said that Kakashi made a deal with her to become an immortal. Now, anybody who has followed occultism for a long time knows about the black pullet, okay, the black hen, if you will. And it's interesting to see how this particular practice was to remove the soul, place it in a needle, which went into an egg, went into a hen, went into a goat, and so forth and so forth and so forth, and eventually found its way onto a mysterious island. Okay, the elixir of life, if you will, that made you an immortal. Now, just about every grimoire that's out there that has been heard of, from the Grand Grimoire to the Grimoire, the Constitution of Pope Honorius, the Black Raven, the Threefold Coercion of Hell, and so forth, all the way up through, you hear about this one practice. Hell, even S. Connolly herself wrote about this. E.A. Koetting has spoken on this, okay, in his videos back when the original YouTube channel of Balg was up and running. And it's interesting because each story, each mythology brings you closer to a different naming of Kakashi. For an example, the Snake Princess. It was said in this storyline, Kakashi wanted to marry this princess, and she flat out rejected him. Guys, those of you who are constantly rejected by women, guess what? You know what this means, right? You get hurt, hurt, and hurt, and hurt. You know, your feelings hurt. You get stepped on. You get fucking told, "Fuck you." You're not getting anything, and it's frustrating. I get it. But in this tale, it's interesting because Kakashi had the power. He was known as a spellcaster, a caster, a wanderer. And it was interesting because in this tale, he turned the princess into a snake. He kidnapped the the royalty and turned her into a snake. Kind of like saying, "Hey, if I can't have you, nobody will." Well, I doubt he actually stopped to think about other serpents. Just saying. But then you got how do you pronounce that? Maryna um, Morevna. I probably just butchered that name, and I'm not good with the Russian language, so I do apologize. Well, in this one, you actually have the Deathless form, and he's known as the Deathless One from what I described in this particular storyline, where he was chained to a wall, found, given water, and rejuvenated. And this particular story links him to Baba Yaga. And it's interesting because when we get into Kakashi, we see where this is a verb, and it means basically being dirty or to cast. And when we go into, say, for an example, Turkish or Scandinavian, we get into the word bone. Now, if we go into Greek necromancy, it means corpse divination, right? So, bone basically means anorexic, somebody who is thin, bony, anorexic, as we call it today. So, it's interesting to see this in Old Russian, not just the Slavic, meaning youth and boy, captive and slave, and even if we get into Slavic, which means basically meaning camp in Turkish, we see where it's almost like a place of rest, if you will. But it goes into the whole folklore, the whole mythology. How did he become that immortal? And was it after transfiguration of his soul? Was it transmortification of the body? Did he master himself through the death essence like a necromancer would do? I mean, like I said, necrotic surgery deals with the removal of dead things, and so that the rest could transpire and live, adapt. And it's interesting to see how other folkloric traditions, such as vampiric, the Strega, or that of, say, for an example, the Elven, how could they live so long? You got the ghoul being transferred into a ghoul by bite or being fed upon. The lycanthrope mythology, for an example, where a bite or a scratch can turn you into a lycanthrope. Hell, even in Haitian Voodoo, you have the zombie powder, which was said to take your will away and make you into a slave. Okay, you basically bring on the appearance of being a cadaver, a corpse, and with a mystical word or talisman, for an example, you can bring this person back to life and they become a zombie. Okay, so there's a lot of mythology that backs up humanity becoming an immortal through practicing witchcraft or death magics. Even in Hermetism, you have the tree of life and the tree of death. Even in Voodoo, you have the Rada spirits, which are like the angels, and the Petro, which are basically demons, if you will. And then you have the Gadi family of Loa, which could be classified as practitioners, non-lineage practitioners, or the uninitiated, if you will, depending on who you talk to in that form. So even if we go back into the old folklore and the traditions, Kakashi's folktale really didn't kick off until the late 1800s, if not early 19th century, in the pagan and Slavic traditions. So, I mean, when you get into these practices, you're going to see a lot of crossovers. I mean, you consider Kakashi's mythology is throughout Europe. I mean, even if you go into the Russian word glick, you know, or the German word lick, or, Lich, for an example, or that of Leiche or Gleiche, you know, or that of the cadaver, meaning dead body. Okay, you're going to see how these practitioners can do this. I mean, even if you go into the Bible, if you want to get into Christianity, you got the Witch of freaking Endor. Okay, everybody from Christian Day to Christopher Penziak to what's that guy's name who wrote one book, far as I know, Lucifer Raphael, Necromancy, the Forbidden Arts was the name of the book. Even if you get into, say, for an example, um, the pact making books, that deal with grimoire traditions, you're still going to see the black pellet and the golden hen, if you will, mythology played into this, the immortal life. And that's why today, even though there's been a lot of corruption and a lot of integrated systems coming together, when you work back through all that mumbo jumbo, going as far back as the 11th and 12th century in Russian and Slavic traditions, for an example, and then going back even further, and you're going into Turkish, you're going back into Greek and Roman, you're going into Indo-European proto-cultures, you're going all the way back into the first, second, and third dynasty of Egypt. You're seeing this practice being done in so many different cultures, different religious perspectives even. So, I mean, it's amazing to see. Okay. So I think one of the things that makes Kakashi so irresistible when it comes to his mythology and folklore is the fact that he went to such extremes in just about every tale that I've come across that deals with him so far, that he was willing to put himself through the pain and the agony to survive, because he feared death. So, I mean, eventually they had to cut him into little pieces and send him his, limbs off to the four corners of the earth. And it's interesting because people fear death. I guess that's why humanity is so obsessed with it. I mean, even as, say, for an example, a CNA or a worker for hospice, you go into the priesthood, become a funeral home director or grave digger, even. You even go into a mortician, you become a medical professional like a doctor. Even they, even though they talk the talk, deep down, even they are afraid of death. So, to understand the death essence, you actually have to understand the body and the nature of the body. So, even if you go into poetry and the classical plays, there are two faucets that we see, and one of them is the soul is truly immortal. Okay, the soul is immortal, and without that soul, you would die. Okay. The second aspect, the second faucet, is the eyes are the windows to the soul. Okay, so seeing that the eyes are the windows into the soul, it is kind of interesting to see the truth. A warrior can always tell if somebody is telling the truth or lying based off the way they look in their eyes. And it's very interesting. I mean, you can talk to any experienced soldier and they'll tell you that. You just get to that point where somebody's telling the truth. You're knowing that they're talking the truth. They're giving you the answers that you're seeking. And then you get into the another faucet, such as say for an example, bloodletting or blood sorcery. Blood is considered the grail, the holy grail, which would grant you eternal life if you choose the right, cup, or grab the wrong cup and you end up withering and dying. You know what I'm saying? So every tradition has some form of Kakashi, but it all surrounds the need and the fight to live longer, to fight. I mean, look at all the drugs that we have today in pharmaceuticals, forms, all controlled by pharmacies and the medical and the FDA. Okay. Look at, say, for an example, all these health nuts where they're telling you to work your body through working out, or you get obese and you end up with all these other diseases such as obesity, kidney disease, heart disease, and whatever. It's all there. So when you see a depiction of, say, for an example, Kakashi, what is it like to have your soul put into a needle, have it ripped out, and use it as a phylactery? Because when you get into the old Turkish language, and you get into their phylacteries, their amulets or talismans, if you will, their relics, they were in an egg shape. So is it too much of a stretch to go from that egg shape, that arrowhead, into a hen laying a golden egg, going into something else, and so forth? No, it's not. Because you got to remember, each region has their own myth and their own legends. And when you get into the vocabulary, that's a whole nother application here. Because then you have to sit there and go, okay, this part of the word is Old Russian. This part of the word comes from Turkey, the old Turkish language. Okay. You put them together, boom, you've got Kakashi. Okay. So, how do you become an immortal? Well, if you go into, say, for an example, the old Scottish grimoire that was written by Peter Haining, okay, known as the Warlock's Grimoire, or the Grimoire, what is it? I got it right here, actually. The Warlock's Book by Peter Haining. Okay, he actually has a elixir that he spoke of, and a little corrupted text, if you will, where it brings in the names of God, Yahweh, or whatever, and calling on him to make it work. But the main ingredients, he tells you about what's in that elixir, and that you need to have somebody there with you, because over the next month, you're going to be taking this elixir once to twice a day. You will get to a point where you have convulsions, seizures, even. And by the time it's said and done, you will become an immortal. You will become an immortal. Okay, now look at the fasting techniques. You have the milk fast. You have the black fast, which goes all the way back to the 11th century Catholics. You have the Daniel's fast, which is modern day Christianity in the Bibles. Okay, and then you have what is known as the more modern version of fasting, known as the Keta fast. And over a certain amount of time, like over throughout a day, if you fasted, not eating anything whatsoever, drinking plenty of fluids, certain intervals has a unique perspective here. So at certain intervals, you're you're getting rid of all the bad stuff that you've ingested, but you're also doing a reset to your system. But what's ironic here is the key thing here is the element water. Water. Out of all things, why the element of water? Why not earth, such as, or nature based stuff? I mean, necromancers use a lot of herbs, herbalism, like, say, for an example, henbane, say for an example, Oriolander, you know, you, even say for an example, hemlock, mixtures, that create an elixir that brings you close to death, but not take you over to the other side. You literally are taking in the death essence to get close to death, to understand death. So, what is it about death that people fear? And why do people like, tales like Koschei's inspire such attention? Who knows? Maybe we will never know that um, that outcome. But Koschei was very evident to be an immortal, a deathless foe, just like Vlad Tempish, who was supposedly killed numerous times in battle, imprisoned numerous times throughout his life, even executed once or twice, and still remained to come back 10 times worse with new ways to torture. But yet, the two pivotal entities that we see in this story is Baba Yaga and that of Kakashi the Immortal, also known as the Deathless One. Very, very interesting. So keep studying, keep cross referencing things. Whatever you preach, always back it up with numerous sources, and always make yourself available to the public. All right? Have a good day, and until next time, I'm out.